All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, the Community Housing Transformation Center's Self-Assessment Tool and Action Plan, a new path to funding and resources. My name is Jacob Gorenkoff, and I'm the Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives at the Canadian Housing Renewal Association. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which I am currently on in Ottawa is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and I thank them for allowing me to live, work, and play on this land. Today's webinar is in real time. You should now be able to see a title screen of today's presentation and be able to hear me via your computer speakers, headset, or through your phone if you've chosen to dial in. As we're in webinar format, you're all muted. If you wish to ask questions, you may type them in the Q&A section on the webinar control panel at any time during the presentation, and we'll address as many as we can at the end of the webinar. Today, we'll be hearing from the ever insightful and humorous Lisa Kerr, Deputy Executive Director of the Community Housing Transformation Center. Lisa, over to you.
No pressure to be insightful or humorous. Thank you very much, Jacob. Hello, everyone who is out there whom I can't really see at this point, but that's okay. Today, I'm going to be presenting on two new tools that will be available very shortly from the Community Housing Transformation Center. I should say from the outset that I will be conducting the presentation for the most part in English, mais sentez-vous complètement à l'aise de poser vos questions également en français si vous le désirez. Ça me fera plaisir de vous répondre. Some of the slides will have some French content just to mix it up a little, but you should have no trouble following if you speak one language or the other only. So the self-assessment tool and the action plan, as I said, are two tools that we are just completing at this point in time. As a matter of fact, we're entering into our testing phase this week, and we're going to be testing, if you will, the tool on organizations who have agreed to complete the assessment, complete an action plan, and then give us a very constructive feedback, we hope, on what works well with these tools, what doesn't work so well, what they'd like to see, and we will have time to do refinements and that sort of thing before we launch, likely towards the end of January 2022. So with that in mind, I would like to extend the invitation to anyone who is following along today, who after going through this presentation thinks, I'd like to check that thing out and give them feedback on it. So if you are one of those organizations, I would be extremely grateful if you were to volunteer your time in order to go through the tools and give us your feedback on how well they work and how useful you find them. So today, basically, I'm just going to talk about why you would use these tools. Then I'll go more extensively into how to use these tools, and then we can do questions. I will say, just as a caveat, if you will, that this is less of a iterative webinar with well, I'll just keep it at that. It's a little more detailed in terms of the how-to. So I'm using screenshots in order to give you an idea of what exactly is involved. So the material might be considered dry to some extent, but I'm hoping that in discussion and with questions and that sort of thing, we can make it a little more lively, if you will. So why would you use a self-assessment tool and an action plan? This general information screenshot is actually from the tool itself, and it details what exactly is involved. So essentially, we're talking about organizations, co-ops, or nonprofit housing organizations of whatever age, whatever era, who have the time to take a look at their organization in different themes, so different areas of work, if you will: governance, property management, financial management, and social community relations. I should note for you as well that within property management, there is a fairly extensive section around energy efficiency and green building and that sort of thing. But basically for these themes, what we're attempting to do is to have owners and operators, organizations who run housing organizations, take a look and do something of a deep dive on their organization. I cannot stress enough that this is a tool for the organization. There is a score element to it. So how do you score on this particular theme or this set of themes is something that we feel is important for organizations to come away with. However, Nobody is rating you. Nobody is watching you. The data itself is not anonymous, but it is confidential. Any and all organizations who will be using these tools are protected by the privacy restrictions or the privacy covenants, if you will, of what the center has negotiated for any and all information that we collect. As many of you may know, the center is a funder and provides allocations to many, many organizations. Since our beginnings in late December 2019, we've allocated $14 million across the country. That information is also not anonymous, but it is confidential to the center and the organization receiving the funds. So there may be organizations as well as a part of FCHI2 who have a requirement with CMHC to complete an action plan. So you may use the center's action plan function to qualify for FCHI2 funds. At present, CMHC is working on their own action plan, but they have been extremely generous in suggesting that both this action plan tool and an action plan tool that was developed by the Agency for Cooperative Housing can be supplemented for their own process in order to obtain FCHI2 funds. So as a part of that funding agreement, this would qualify, and that would be up to the organization to share their data with CMHC. So as you can see here, there's some generic information. Basically, it should take you no more than half an hour. If you are somebody who's very thoughtful or reflective, of course, it can take longer. There are suggestions about this being completed by management or board members, depending on the type of organization you have. In one of the sessions where we discussed the use of these tools, someone suggested that they'd like to see a manager and a board member complete the assessment on their own and then compare notes. That's entirely up to you. You have that kind of organization that likes to do that sort of, shall we say, reflection and comparison, then fantastic. So the 4 themes, as was suggested in the general information page, are governance, property management, financial management, and tenant, or in the case of co-ops, member involvement and community relations. So basically, I'll just go right into the how. When you log into the self-assessment tool, it's a very straightforward process. You log in via the website of the center. There is an application we call Portico, and that's how many organizations log in order to look at funding and apply for funding with us. So you have your own name as a housing provider. You click on that. You look for your organization in the database. If it's not there, this is sort of technical. And then you click on add or join to search for your organization. That's the way you go about that. Once you have connected to your organization and it's the correct organization that you identify with, then you simply go to self-assessment tool and you're ready to begin. So beginning the assessment is an exercise that is very straightforward. Basically, we offer 2 different versions of the self-assessment tool, one for nonprofits and one for housing co-ops. And the questions are developed in such a way as to respect the differences between those 2 models of nonprofit housing. Basically, you select which one you want to do. So in this case, as you can see, the select button is highlighted for the housing co-ops. Then you simply click on begin assessment and away you go. When you get to the first page, you're looking at general information that is related to your perceptions around your priorities. So for example, I'll translate for those who don't speak French necessarily, but for general information, what is your agreement with the following affirmations? So in this case, because we selected cooperative housing, that's the example we're going to use. So you have 5 choices. You completely agree, you're more or less in agreement, you're neither in agreement nor in disagreement, you're not sure, but mostly in disagreement, or completely in disagreement. So the questions, for example, are, in order to function well, a cooperative has to have good governance, competent management, and that these be democratic and rigorous processes. The second question is, in order to offer quality long-term housing, it's important to plan out your management at, your maintenance and your renovations. So very generic questions. And this section just takes you through that type of question in order to garner a sense from you of what the priorities are for your organization. It's at this point that you're then able to identify, for example, I would like to focus on governance. I'm in agreement with doing the other sections, but governance is a big issue for our agency. Or conversely, financial management is our priority. You can have more than one priority. You can do all four, obviously, because they're all there. But that's essentially what this section is for. Then you actually have an exercise to set those priorities. So how important is governance for your organization, for your co-op? Very important, somewhat, not important, I don't know. As you can see, there's a little red star, and the asterisk appears several times that says this question is required. That's in order to fulfill the flow, if you will, of the SAT. So the other topics will appear in the same way. You also then can get into detailed questions. So for example, under governance, how well do each of the following statements describe your board and its governance? The board meets regularly. The board meeting minutes are kept, filed, and they are accessible. The board has written policies and procedures. The board reviews its policies and procedures regularly. So there are questions that will appear that are of, again, a very generic nature around governance, financial management, property management, and tenant and community relations. Here are others examples of detailed questions. So have you undertaken work recommended by your most recent evaluation or building condition assessment? And then you have choices around that. What is your approach to preventative maintenance and proactive repairs on this property? So this is a sample. As you can see by the numbers, 15, 16, then we get into the 20s. So there are a number of questions that concern different aspects of the four themes that get you into real details. So the property is financially viable, vacancy losses are minimal, housing charges or rent arrears are close to zero, your capital reserve is enough to complete plan reservations. And again, you score yourself under well, very well, to some extent, not at all, etc. Other questions, for example, sorry, and I went too fast there. It's because of the way that the screen is set up, I can't quite read the question and can't quite see it, so I apologize. But the first question concerns replacement reserves for a property. The second is the level of involvement of the property's members. So in the case of a cooperative, in the nonprofit, it will say what is the level of involvement, for example, of the tenants in the activities of the organization, for example. So you're looking at tenant or member involvement on boards and committees, on organizing of events and activities, preparation of newsletters and other communication tools. So we've tried to delve in as much as possible with as broad a range of questions, but not getting into too detailed an assessment. This is still, even though you can see we're on question 28 potentially, there is still an effort to cover as much as possible in the operations of an organization. Then you can actually get into addressing specific properties of your portfolio. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure we did was given an organization an opportunity to have the exercise focus on a property by property basis. So of 5, 10, 15 or more properties, you know that some buildings are better performing than others, some are older than others, and some require more work than others. So this is an opportunity to allow you to establish the priorities for your portfolio. So for example, this question relates to end of operating agreements, of course, and for this particular property, which you will have identified throughout the course of the SAT, you have a plan to address it, you have initial assessments, the work has been postponed. So again, a range of options around that property. You have the opportunity to put your work on hold. So we said it would take about 30 minutes. You may not have 30 minutes. You can take your time. You may decide that you want to evaluate 10, 15, 20, 30 different properties, depending on the size of your portfolio. That's not going to take you half an hour. That's going to take you a lot longer, unless you have several people working on it, which is different. But you do have the opportunity. For example, here you can see that if you click on the sort of like a little page icon, then you are able to reinitiate the assessment once you put it on hold. You can use the pencil icon to specify a particular property that you want to name for the assessment to distinguish amongst different assessments that you're doing. So the self-assessment tool can apply to different buildings, and you can keep a running tab of different assessments that you're doing at the same time. Once you are satisfied with something, in this case, the title, you just click on the check mark. That's sort of standard throughout the entire SAT. Once you are ready to submit, the questions that you will have answered, there is a record of what it is you have answered and what you haven't, so that if you have missed out, for example, on a section or a given question in a section, it will tell you you must answer all the questions, and you have forgotten to answer under section 2, how important is governance for your NPO. So there is a record keeping function within the self-assessment, so that you don't have to go back and figure out what is it that I didn't answer. That will be explained to you. And once you have done that, then you're free to simply save and then submit. Now, once you have submitted your SAT, it is completed, and you cannot open it again and then restart the assessment. It is a completed assessment. This is your assessment. If you're not happy with what it is you did, you can start the assessment again. Unfortunately, for the purposes, technologically speaking, of conducting an SAT, we had to close it off at some point. Now, you can open it up, you can review it, you can also download a copy, and you can print it. So the different arrows show you how to do that, either by using the eye function or the little icon that looks like a printer. I should point out that most of these screenshots are taken from the tutorial that we are building to support organizations who will be going through the SAT. So you're not sort of just left to intuitively figure out, how does this thing work? We have a very comprehensive tutorial, as well as a video that will explain if you run into any questions or trouble with the assessment, and it will give you a hands-on experience that we hope is clear and provides you with as much information as you need in order to complete the assessment. Now, once you have submitted, a score is actually generated. So there is a scorecard function that's built into it. To click on by clicking on the bar chart icon, as you see, you can actually see the scorecard for the answers that you provided. So for example, under governance here, I happen to score 68%. And there is a statement of sorts that says that I have a reasonable but limited handle on board and management structure. Consider reflecting on how to improve these processes. Again, I cannot emphasize enough, the score is your own score. Nobody at the center cares about your score. And by that, I don't mean that we don't care profoundly about how your operations work and how you're doing, but this is your information, nobody else's. You decide who you want to share it with. You decide what you want to do with it. You might look at 68% and go, really? I think I did better than that. Or 68%, I can't believe I did that well. That's the score that's generated based on your responses and the algorithm that we're using. It's entirely up to you to do with what you will. You will also see the average score for the overall assessment. So you will have scores by themes, but you'll also have the overall assessment, which in this case, for example, is 80%, but it identifies that you have a weakness or an area that could be enhanced or improved upon, which is in this case, property management. By definition of how you answered the questions, there is also a pie chart that reveals what is actually a priority according to your answers. So in this case, the organization has placed the highest importance on governance and financial management. So you can actually use that as a priority setting exercise and then take it from there if you wish. There are organizations who may look at that and go, yes, it is very important to us, but right now, we're going to focus on social and community relations. Again, entirely up to you. This is your tool. There is also a page that we're calling Outlook, which gives you something of a summary of what you, based on your answers, you as your organization's future. So for example, in terms of vitality, viability, and resilience, you believe your organization is unable to react to changing needs. You might want to look at that. You believe your organization is unable to maintain current service levels. That's an issue. Why is that? How to remedy that? You believe your organization is, now these all appear as negatives just to give you an idea, but you could also be an organization, for example, whose resilience score is very high. Your organization is prepared to meet the challenges of the day. You have a plan for going forward, et cetera, et cetera. It all depends on the answers to the questions. This takes us into the next part, which is the action plan. So what we're trying to construct is something of a seamless process whereby an organization deciding to undertake the self-assessment tool will then be able to develop an action plan, and based on what they answered in the self-assessment tool, the action plan itself will propose strategies and recommendations because of the score you achieved or the answers that you provided to certain questions. So as you can see here, there are, quote, top suggestions. So for example, for this particular organization, there are suggestions around arrears management, around capital reserve strategy, and around eviction prevention. And the organization in question is able to add each of those, or as you see above, add all of them at once. There is literally a bank of recommendations and suggestions to put in an action plan. Those are all available to you. What we're trying to facilitate is so that you don't have to look through the bank of all the different action items. Based on your SAT, we are going to suggest, your responses suggest that these areas are areas you could look at or you want to work on. You can or not. It's entirely up to you, because your action plan, again, is yours, and you'll build it according to what you think is your priority, what you think is the area you'd like to focus on. Perhaps what you've identified in a strategic plan is something that is essential for your organization over the next 2, 3 to 5 years. That is entirely up to you. The action plan itself comes up on the screen under 4 different sections. The first is to do. The second is in progress, the third is done, and the fourth is on hold. So as you can see on the left, there is a button that says add new action. You can have a to-do list that is as long or as short as you see fit. By the same token, as you go through different actions and are able to cross them off your list, you can either put them in progress, so you are free to move these actions around this table, or put them in done, or put them on hold. Perhaps you've undertaken on your to-do list 20 actions and realized 6 months later, there's a lot going on here. We're going to put half of them on hold. Or we've got some in progress, some that are done, maybe just a few of them on hold. Again, that's entirely up to you. And this is a completely self-administered part of the action planning process. So your action plan will relate to what it is that you see your organization undertaking. You can add items to the action plan at any point by clicking on add new action. You can call them by your own title. There is a due date. In each of the action plan items, there is a suggested amount of time it will take to do that action. For example, complete a strategic plan. We will likely have put in, if memory serves me correctly, between 9 months to a year to complete that action. If you think you can complete a strategic plan, perhaps because it's already underway, in 3 months, then you can simply amend the date. So there is a due date, you can put in a description, and then you can put in an expected outcome. Because in a sense, this will become an action plan that you can print out, that you can share either with your board, with membership, with your funders, depending on who it is that this is for, in addition to yourselves. So for example, I want to add a action around board community involvement. I give it a title, I put in the due date, I describe it, and I describe the outcome that I'm expecting from adding this new action. You can also edit. So the board community involvement, for example, as I said, had that due date of 2022. Interesting. I have not thought about whether this is the English or French, whether we're talking the month of September or we're talking the month of February. In any event, I can get that cleared up. But again, this is where you get to go in and you get to edit according to what your needs are. You can also move actions to other sections in the original table that I showed you by clicking on icons, which are just a faster way of doing it. So there's quicker ways or longer ways, depending on how you like to work. When you put an action on hold, there will be a pop-up saying why. What is the reason you're putting this action on hold? You can put in whatever reason you want, because I feel like it. Or you can put in because, in this case, waiting for funding from an external source and it hasn't come in yet. So we're putting this over there. It's going to be on hold for a bit. If you move an action to done, then there will be again a pop-up to ask you to outline what happened. You had an expected outcome. What was the actual outcome? Did things go according to your plan? And then you can also rate the success of the action if you so choose. Once you've done that, you can save it or not. That is, again, entirely up to you. You can also postpone and you can delete actions, of course. If you wish to postpone, you use the calendar icon, and as you can see, it will come into 14-day, 30-day, 90-day, depending on the original time frame. So if something is expected to take 6 months, then you will have postpone options that go up to 6 months, obviously. If it's going to take longer than that to do, then you will edit it differently. But these are just functions that are built into the action plan. There is also, at the end, once you have built your action plan and you have it in the table format, a calendar option. And that actually allows you to lay out everything in terms of a standard calendar. You can use a weekly, you can use a monthly, you can use an annual setting. That's entirely up to you. Moreover, and this is the part that feeds into the next part of this exercise, if you have used the action plan and the self-assessment tool in order to prepare for a funding application, for example, with the center, and you have been successful, we will be adding your funding application amount and your payouts to the calendar. So you will be able to see in the calendar, once we get to this date, we will receive an installment of our funding from the center for this project associated with this action plan item. So there are many ways to use the calendar with or without funding from the center. So initially, part of the way that we presented this presentation was in showing people that this was a new way to set yourselves up successfully for a proposal that would be funded by the center. Something that I like to reinforce as much as possible is the nature of the center's funding is not competitive. This is not a competition between organizations for a pot of funds and maybe you'll be successful and let's see what happens. That's not the way we work. It is very important for us to establish a relationship with you. That's why we have program managers who work full-time on developing ideas and outcomes and plans for proposals for organizations with the ultimate goal that you will receive funding. That is, to some degree, the objective. You should be receiving the funding that you want. Now, of course, we have parameters and we have priorities and we have other limitations. For example, I think it's fairly common knowledge that we do not fund capital work. For example, that's not what we're allowed to do. So there are some restrictions, there are some parameters to follow, but by and large, the SAT and the action plan, we hope, will help people develop a focus or identify those projects that correspond to what the center can fund. So in completing a self-assessment tool and then developing an action plan where you, and I'll go back to the traditional sort of example, where you determine we need to do a strategic plan. We need to develop a building condition assessment plan. We need to we need to do more tenant training on rights and responsibilities of being a tenant, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all things that we fund. And having the action plan to help you focus all your efforts, because you all have a lot going on in your business, but being able to focus for yourselves and determine, okay, these 3 projects are something that we should work on, and let's go to the center and see if we can get funding for all 3. That is what we're there for. Under no circumstances is funding incumbent upon you doing this, in no way. We're hoping that these tools will help you focus so that when you do come to us, you can say, we did the SAT, we put together an action plan, and we discovered that these were 3 priorities that we wanted to look at this year. Can you help us and can you fund us for these 3 priorities? That's all. And I think I am now at the question.
Thanks so much, Lisa. That was very informative, and there's a little bit of humor injected in there too, which I really appreciate.
Trying
Yeah,
with very dry material. Very dry. Maybe I'll be more humorous with the questions.
Well, I hope so. So we got a couple that came in related to whether the slides will be available afterwards and if the recording of the webinar will be available. Yes to both. Happy to make the recording available, and Lisa's happy to share her slides. So opening the floor to any questions. If anybody has any, please feel free to type them in now and we will get to them as soon as possible.
This is where we sing the Jeopardy song.
I would, but I have a singing voice that makes babies cry. So it's better for everybody if I don't even hum.
It's okay. I think my brother, who is a singer, once said that I had a voice that was like the mating call of a whale. He's my little brother. I think he's supposed to say stuff like that.
Sure, for sure. We haven't had any other questions come in
No,
yet.
we have not.
But Lisa, was there any other information that you think is worth sharing about the application or the tools for now? Like, for example, where will people be able to go to find additional information when it's live?
We will be conducting an extensive outreach and communications strategy in order to, for lack of a better term, flog these tools so that everyone knows they're available for their use. For people who may be watching or listening in today, upon receiving the slides, for any questions you might have, don't hesitate to contact me. My contact information actually was on the last slide, which I didn't show, but you'll see it in receiving the slides. Happy to answer any and all questions around this on a one-on-one basis, but we will be going out to the sector with the assistance of associations and organizations like CHRA to promote the tools availability and what people can do with it. And again, I will stress that there are tutorials and there will be aide-mémoire, there will be additional tools in order to help you work on these.
Awesome, thanks, Lisa. And CHRA will happily help you flog that. I have a question from Mary. How does the self-assessment work for organizations that are housing related but not a housing provider?
There are certainly elements of the questionnaire in the self-assessment tool that relate, for example, tenant community relations, that sort of thing. I think there could be valid questions there. Financial management, of course, is something that we can all focus on to some degree. Governance also. You don't have to be a housing provider to have governance related questions, issues, or successes. So that's another part. I guess the only part that wouldn't be as relevant if you were not a housing provider is the property management.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Thanks, Lisa. Somewhat related to the tools, but not completely related. Are there any priorities that the center is going to have over the upcoming year for projects to fund?
We have 6 priorities that are based on a strategic exercise that was undertaken by the board when we were first founded, if you will, which was a couple of years ago. And those priorities dovetail with our strategic plan, which is a 5-year plan. I would say out of the 6 priorities which are available on our website and focused on the themes, if you will, of our funding, 2 for this year that we're particularly going to stress are reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and eco-responsibility. So anything and everything related to what in the past we've referred to as greening or green initiatives. We have currently we have a partnership with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to offer regional energy coaching to organizations who want to do energy efficiency projects but don't quite know where to start. In the new year, we're going to be launching training in 2 areas. We have a package of 5 modules in a training that will be offered for free for, I believe it's to start with 900 organizations for reconciliation. And we also have a training that will be available to housing providers, again, for free across the country, that will focus on housing maintenance in an energy efficient context.
Great. Sounds very exciting. We have a question in the chat here. So what was the initial objective of the tool to improve the distribution of center funds, improve the situation of nonprofit housing providers across Canada, or something else?
Definitely, and this remains the objective, is capacity building. So for organizations, and again, that's why we want to stress the confidential nature of the exercise. No organization needs to air, for lack of a better term, their dirty laundry. There are many organizations who succeed and thrive in many areas, but have 1 or 2 things they want to work on. There are many organizations who are 3/4 of the way where they want to be and just need a little more effort, possibly funding, perhaps just support and resources in order to complete their objectives. But ultimately, and this speaks to the goal of the Community Housing Transformation Center as well, is that transformational element, which includes, it's because I know Laure asked the question, so I'm thinking in French in my head and translating, is to rehausser la capacité, so to improve the capacity of organizations through a means that I think is less punitive is not the word. We're not imposing anything on organizations, but we are giving you trains of thought and themes to explore on your own. And through, as one of the staff who's been working on this tool said, it isn't to anyone's advantage to downplay or to misrepresent, because this is only yours. So you may look at a question and think, we should be better at that. There's no incentive for you to put that you are better than you actually are, because then it gives you a misrepresentation of your reality. And the whole point is for us to look at our reality and objectively, as much as possible, say, okay, we have some work to do in these areas. That's all the tool is helping you to do, is build your own internal capacity through your own assessment, as opposed to somebody else's, a funder's, or others' view on your organization. Because ultimately, no one knows your organization like the people, yourselves included, who work in the organization.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. So we don't have any other questions right now. I think maybe you did such a comprehensive presentation that people don't really have many. So I guess maybe we'll just wrap up with Lisa. Are there any parting thoughts that you want to give to the audience?
I'm looking forward to rolling this out, and I'm hoping that mostly through the input of other organizations who will be testing it out for this, or for us, we will be able to hone in on the best possible tool for the use of the sector, because ultimately that's the purpose of it.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you to everybody that joined us today for Lisa's informative presentation. I know that I really learned a lot, and I hope you did too. We're going to be sending a follow-up email with a copy of Lisa's slide deck, as well as a link to a recording of the webinar, probably within the next couple of days. Thank you again, everybody. Take care and stay safe.
Thanks, Jacob. Take care, everyone.